we are living in an illusory construct, very much like the Matrix of the movies. And of course, in the movies, they take great liberties in providing special effects and fictional circumstances and dramatic arcs and all the rest of it. But in the real one, it's not so obvious because we've been brought up, we've been conditioned to believe that this is the way things are. In reality, as I learned after 9/11 and poking through that story and dismantling that story and all the holes in it, and you can too. I mean, you can find the information. There's hundreds of discrepancies in that official story. But I came to find out that the news is controlled to control us. It's called social engineering. And a bunch of rich elites got together after World War II and decided on silent weapons for quiet wars. They adopted the philosophy that a slave that doesn't know he's a slave is a happy slave. And with the help of fluoride in the water, which was used in concentration camps in Germany, by the way, to dumb us down and make us more docile and unquestioning, they have succeeded in covering up a great deal. So, for those of us who are looking for truth in alternative websites, InfoWars is one of the biggest ones, as opposed to CNN, ABC, CBS, all of those that are clearly operated by the elites. InfoWars and Prison Planet, its sister site. There are many others. Before It's News is one that aren't quite as big and famous. But Alex Jones runs InfoWars. You may have even seen him on CNN now with Piers Morgan. And he's getting quite big and famous. And as such, he seems to have been bought off at some point in the last 10 years. He's moved over to their side. He's allowing them to take lists, make lists of us, and this is why he seems to be having much more success, I believe. And that's always a big hint. When somebody gets a lot of exposure, a lot of fame and notoriety, especially in the mainstream media, you can pretty much bet that they've been compromised or bought off. So even though I still go there for a lot of news that we'll never hear on the mainstream stations, I still go there to get a lot of information. Like the Rolling Stone reporter Michael Hastings, who was murdered because he was going to write a big expose about the CIA and, among other things, the way they've brought all kinds of drugs in, heroin from Afghanistan, and that was one of the reasons why we went to Afghanistan, by the way. Why we're fighting a war there. There's tons of heroin there, and anyway, drugs come into this country in ways that you would never have imagined. But let's take a look at the real Alex Jones for a minute, shall we?
I can say that these groups that you guys try to illustrate here, they're usually confusing and mysterious to try to pinpoint who they are. But I found that too.
Let me just stop you. You have the elite, the global elite that understand how humans operate. The first
Well, what I was going to say though is that I think two people in history have illustrated very well who these elite are. Two of them being Benjamin Friedman and Jack Bernstein.
Benjamin Friedman and Jack Bernstein.
Which I have transcripts of them on my website at prothink.org.
Oh, you're that stupid twit.
Yep, I'm the twit.
You look like such a weak little punk, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Alex.
Hey, take care, weakling.
Thank you.
Why don't you come up to New York next time I'm up there? I'll be up there this year.
I'll see you.
I'll be there.
I'll see
you. Hear me? I'm going to be there.
I'll be there the third time this year.
Good. You come up and talk to me.
All right, we'll have a little discussion.
Good, punk.
All right.
You little coward, you piece of crap. Hey, coward, I'm going to be in New York. You hear me, punk?
Hey, Alex. Alex, it's all right, man. You can calm down, dude.
No,
No, it's
this is
okay,
the
Alex.
real radio show, punk. You just
Hey.
go ahead and come up there, you little cowardly soft twit. I dare you to come up to me in New York, you little punk, you little weak punk. We run this country now! Bend him over! Come on, little piggy! Let me hear you squeal! Wee! Wee! I mean, they just literally, the big butcher knife in a press center going, I can't wait till we get the American people's guns. God, we're gonna kill them. We're gonna take everything they got like the Red Terror. Oh, we love it. Oh, yeah. Hollywood is owned by the Arabs. How dare them not submit to us and our divine will? We're geniuses. No. You're here. We're gonna feed on your ass. Bullshit, man. It's fucking working. I've been drinking beer. You go to prisonplanet.com. If you go to Infowars.com, prisonplanet.com, the Infowars Twitter account on Infowars.com, and prisonplanet.com. You just go ahead and come up there, you little cowardly soft twit. I dare you to come up to me in New York, you little punk. What is your major malfunction?
So one of the reasons why I'm showing you Alex tonight is because he's pretty closely associated with his buddy Joe Rogan, who first came to fame in a show called News Radio, I believe. And since then, he's become kind of a countercultural, almost a hero, activist, so-called activist, and whistleblower and whatnot. Well, here's another one. He seems to be everywhere. He's got a TV now show called Joe Rogan Questions Everything, and it would seem that, yeah, he's going to blow the lid off of everything from Bigfoot to chemtrails to robotic people and clones and whatever. But, well, you know what? It seems otherwise. It seems that Joe has also been compromised as well. And you may have seen him in that clip with Alex Jones there, and Joe Rogan hanging out and drinking together. And so Joe Rogan, big lying, traitorous snake, the worst kind, just like Alex Jones, pretending to be a big hero and exposing the New World Order, meanwhile taking marching orders from them to haul you in and expose you to danger and jeopardy. If you're really a libertarian, a freedom lover, and you're trying to find out what's what, these guys are the worst kind of traitor. They pretend to be heroes, they pretend to be activists and saviors, but they're not. They're sellouts. And here's a little bit of what Joe Rogan did on his latest chemtrails TV show. I wanted to show more about chemtrails, and he actually has some good people on here, but of course he does a lot of eye-rolling and discrediting while he's interviewing these people. So take a look at a little bit of Joe Rogan Questions Everything about chemtrails and weather manipulation in this episode.
Mother Nature has been kicking the crap out of this planet lately. Earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, and tornadoes. Many people attribute these disasters to global warming, but some people claim that something else may be going on, that many of these disasters may have been caused by human manipulation. One of the methods of manipulation is something called chemtrails. And what are chemtrails? There are people that believe that the cloud-like trails you see in the sky behind jets are actually the government spraying evil chemicals. Before I get into how chemtrails supposedly control the weather, I need to find out if there's any truth to chemicals being sprayed. I'm gonna look into this by talking to Kristen Megan, a whistleblower who is formerly with the U.S. Air Force, and she claims that she's seen evidence that shows that this is exactly what's happening. Tell us about your experiences with chemtrails when you were with the Air Force.
Part of my job was to approve hazardous materials that were acquired on base. I started seeing large quantities of strontium, barium, and aluminum. This material came too frequent, too much, with no contractor name. This didn't make sense to me.
Did you ask anyone what all those chemicals are for?
I asked a couple of people that were my equal rank that I felt I could confide in, but It was more of the shut up and color, let's not question it. So I started to see memos come down saying, you know, disregard certain things that are called chemtrails, you know, that's just a theory. We're working on weather items here, weather studies. I realized this is the perfect setup. Basically, aircraft from all over the Air Force gets taken to this base and gets dismantled down to last screw, put back together, and before the paint is put on, you have white aircraft with no markings flying around. So to me, all the pieces fell into place.
Is that a chemtrail?
No, that's not a chemtrail.
That's a contrail?
It's a contrail.
What is the difference between a contrail and a chemtrail? Contrails, they say, are the natural streams that occur behind jets that dissipate quickly, whereas chemtrails, they stay in the sky and become clouds. Now, has anybody identified one of these cargo aircrafts and found chemical containers inside? Has anybody found some sort of a distribution method, a spray nozzle, some sort of evidence to indicate that they're spraying things from planes?
It's very controlled. You cannot go on a flight line and take pictures. If you do, you will be on the ground with an M16 in your back.
I enjoyed talking to Kristen, but she's making some crazy claims. I believe that she saw those chemicals, but in my opinion, there's a gigantic leap between knowing these chemicals exist and proving that the government is spraying them from the skies. But if they are spraying them, how does it control the weather? Now, I have to admit that I am very skeptical when it comes to the idea of chemtrails, but if there's a man that's going to convince me, it's Michael Murphy. Michael is the go-to guy when it comes to chemtrails. He's made 2 documentaries on them. They've been seen by over 2 million people, and he claims that he has evidence that's going to convince me that chemtrails are real and that the government is using them to manipulate weather. Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me. So you believe that all these crisscrossing patterns in the sky, these are government planes that are spraying something that's trying to control the weather. It's been kept a secret from the American public. The pilots have kept their mouths shut, although they've flown thousands and thousands and thousands of flights, and that what they're doing is they're controlling the weather.
We proved it in the last film. Yeah, there's no question about it. In some days we get very few trails, but there are trails. Other days we get a complete canopy. We noticed that those were the days that occurred right before major storms came in. And that's when we contacted meteorologists and started looking at, is there a connection between chemtrails and the weather? Every scientist said, without question,
I'm not buying what Michael Murphy's selling. I'm even more skeptical now. I don't think he knows enough about the weather to be talking about this, so I'm gonna talk to a guy who does. His name is Scott Stevens. He's a meteorologist, and he is a chemtrail believer. First of all, man, thank you very much for doing this. Really appreciate it, and thanks for sharing whatever information you know about this. Now, as a meteorologist, what have you seen that's led you to believe that there's been some changes in the environment?
I first began to get the inkling that there was something up in the 90s. Because, Joe, forecasting weather is not that difficult.
We've got Ophelia, which continues to intensify just off the east coast of Florida, and that's the big concern.
There were storms that were not behaving as they should. Time after time, the guys in D.C. were issuing what they termed a low-confidence forecast. And I'm like, but we see it, we know how big it is, we know how much water is there. Why is it a low-confidence forecast? So that was something that was in the back of my head. And in the meantime, I was always an alternative media kind of guy. Being in mainstream, I knew how much news was not delivered.
So you have some videos to show me? You have some
pictures of odd cloud formations. And honestly, Joe, I probably would still be going, what's going on, if I hadn't set up time-lapse cameras.
Okay, beautiful. Let's check this stuff out. Let's go downstairs and check it out.
And this is a time-lapse that I captured a couple of years ago that should make it very clear to people kind of what these planes are doing. That's one trail. Boom, there's 2, here's 3, and another one will come up and hit that center point like that.
So when you see these crisscross patterns across the sky, what do you believe is happening?
See this square in the clouds with the ice crystals weeping off of this. So something is coming this way, and it is this square void.
But isn't that normal for clouds? Like random weird patterns?
But they're not random. Clouds are supposed to be round. Well, look at this square cloud out here over Billings, Montana. And here's a void. Exactly matches the shape and orientation of this cloud.
Huh.
That shouldn't happen. And this happens frequently.
You believe that there's some sort of technology that's controlling the weather?
Sure, they want to claim climate change or carbon dioxide, but that doesn't make sense. It just doesn't wash. So there has to be some other delta, some other data, some other change that they're not considering. And in my opinion, it's zombie storms. Seriously.
Are the world's governments manipulating the weather and creating huge zombie freak storms that come out of nowhere? Well, that is what meteorologist Scott Stevens believes. As a meteorologist, you believe that there's some sort of technology that's controlling the weather?
Yeah, we're having so many events that are beyond what is normal. Zombie storms are those things that just, say, rise up out of nowhere and that are these beasts. And in my opinion, it's global weather engineering, geoengineering, and it's been underway for every bit of 30 years. And that would explain why we have these droughts that are historic, why we have biblical floods in Australia.
So you firmly believe in this?
What I didn't know for the longest time is who is doing it to who. Russians against us against Chinese, you know, what is going on? And then I just kind of settled back that part of keeping the economic system going is consumption at higher prices.
Not too bad, but, you know, he seems to be exposing things. He seems to be fair, but he uses a lot of words that are kind of psychological triggers. They're very subtle, but they're meant to discredit these people. Like he'll say, so-and-so claims to have seen chemicals brought onto the airbase. And then he'll roll his eyes after a particularly unusual claim, and so on and so forth. But still in all, he seems to be trying to do a fair job of exposing it, right? But remember who's paying him. Remember who he's ultimately working for. And check out the way he ends the show. Put you back to sleep, so you don't question anymore. Oh, there, you know, you can just go on and forget about it because everything's all right. And so check this out: the traitorous Joe Rogan.
There's so much conspiratorial, like, leaning.
But if HARP is capable of causing earthquakes, tornadoes, what a great weapon that would be.
Yeah, I agree. That's not outside the realm of possibilities. They would experiment on affecting weather. I don't know, man. Here's what I learned on my journey. What people are calling chemtrails are not the government spraying evil chemicals on you. They look like clouds because they are clouds. What you really should be concerned with is the fact that they're burning jet fuel over your head to the tune of 93,000 flights a day worldwide. If somebody came up to you and said, hey man, they're thinking about starting fires in the sky where they burn toxic fuel over our heads, you'd be like, oh, I'm cool with that, as long as I can get to Miami in 5 hours. Woo woo. The HARP thing is a bit more confusing. It's terrifying when you're too dumb to know who's stupid. And unfortunately, that's where I find myself. I don't know who's correct. And the only people who really know are the people that are working at HARP. And none of them are talking. And I wouldn't talk either. Just, when the aliens come, you got some splaining to do.
What a disgusting turncoat. I mean, that guy is the worst of the worst, posing as an activist and a hero, and all the while selling out to his Illuminati slave masters. I hate those guys. I hate Alex Jones for doing that, and I hate Joe Rogan. He's a traitor to those of us who are trying to preserve liberty and blow the whistle on these evildoers. So, what can I say? Anyway, I've got to move on to the conclusion of the depleted uranium story called Beyond Treason. I showed the first half of it last time. This is just another way your friendly government takes care of you, and in this instance, the veterans. Fill them full of shots, toxic shots when they come in, expose them to radiation all the while they're in the service. while irradiating the countryside of the Middle East. Then when they come home, just simply discard them and forget about them. Let them die and wither away in agony as they die slowly of all of the crap that they got when they were in the service and they thought they were serving their country. So here's the conclusion of Beyond Treason, the depleted uranium story.
I was tasked to clean up the uranium munitions by name, by order, during Gulf War I. I was assigned as the depleted uranium project director. I did the research. I prepared the programs. I wrote the regulations for management. I wrote the procedures for management. And I got sick because I served my nation. And I was discarded. I was abandoned.
Depleted uranium weapons are designed not only to kill the enemy, devastate the civilian population for generations to come, but DU weapons also destroy the environment and damage the economy. In 1996, the United Nations passed a resolution that made DU illegal under international law. In order to protect themselves and continue the illegal usage of depleted uranium, the United States government has co-opted the International Criminal Court, thus protecting certain individuals from war crimes charges. Unbeknownst to most U.S. citizens and unreported in the U.S. media was the International Criminal Tribunal for Afghanistan held at Tokyo, Japan, December 15th of 2002. Those meetings lasted for over a year. The initial complaint presented for the tribunal charges George Bush with 31 counts of war crimes, violations of the Geneva Conventions, and other crimes against peace in the war on Afghanistan. In addition to the original 31 war crime charges against George Bush, the judges and tribunal recommended 2 additional charges. Number 1, Bush knowingly used depleted uranium on the battlefield against his own troops, and number 2, that it was, in fact, a crime against the environment.
The United States Army, USAMR at Fort Detrick, Maryland, sold and provided the chemical and biological munitions and anthrax spores to Iraq. That's totally confirmed in the Regal Commission report written by James Toot and the subject of a made-for-TV movie called Thanks to a Grateful Nation that starred Ted Danson and Mark Helgenberger.
The United States has a long-standing involvement in the sale of weapons to third world countries. Donald Rumsfeld, a private citizen, met with Saddam Hussein as a political envoy of the Reagan administration on December 20th of 1983. It is a little-known fact that he was also president and CEO of the G.D. Cyril Pharmaceutical Company. According to Howard Teicher, author of Twin Pillars to Desert Storm, he and Rumsfeld traveled to Baghdad on December 17th in order to lay the groundwork for the presumption of full diplomatic relations between the United States and Iraq. Prior to that time, Iraq was on the known list of terrorist countries. Iraq invaded Iran in September of 1980. It is important to note that the ban on the sale of weapons was in force until 1982, when it was lifted with the strong objections from Congress. The U.S. began the transfer of helicopters to Iraq in December of 1982. In 1983, Banco Nazionale del Lavoro of Italy and its branch in Atlanta began to funnel $5 billion in unreported loans to Iraq with the blessing and official approval of the U.S. government. The Reagan administration began secretly allowing Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Egypt to transfer United States weapons, including howitzers, Huey helicopters, and bombs to Iraq. These shipments violated the Arms Export Control Act. From 1985 through 1989, the Department of Commerce licensed 70 biological exports to Iraq, including approximately 21 batches of lethal strains of anthrax, shipments of weapons-grade Clostridium botulinum, and West Nile fever virus. In April of 1988, the Department of Commerce approved the shipment of chemicals used in the manufacture of mustard gas. The U.S., with the approval of the CDC and the Department of Commerce, armed Iraq illegally from 1985 through 1989.
We knew from the fact that Iraq had got chemical and biological weapons from the United States and used them on Iraqi Kurds and on the Iranians, that they didn't have in their possession, they would probably use them. We knew that all the toxic industrial chemicals that we use in the military, when we move a military, go into combat, were going to affect everybody. We knew that all of the other weapon systems we had have a horrible health and environmental effect on the battlefield. That's history. And with all the background all of us had, both within the military and within academia, it was very easy for us to understand and predict what was going to happen. During the period of 1990 and 1991, we made a conscious decision, and this decision was a decision made between General Powell, General Schwarzkopf, General Horner, and Secretary Cheney to blow up Iraq's chemical and biological stockpiles in place. We also decided to blow up their nuclear reactors in place. This is all confirmed in Schwarzkopf's autobiography, It Doesn't Take a Hero, on page 390. For somebody who wants to look, you can go find out for yourself. At that time, we warned everybody that these exposures, downwind exposures, were going to have a disastrous effect on U.S. military personnel, on coalition personnel, on Iraqi personnel, and on the civilians and non-combatants in the region. That warning was ignored.
The average military person had no knowledge that the United States was secretly and illegally continuing to sell weapons of mass destruction to Iraq just prior to Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm. It is important to note that these biological materials were not attenuated or weakened and were capable of reproduction, thus illustrating these biological agents were not for research, but for the purpose of weaponization. Not even the military medical personnel tasked with treating the wounded on the battlefield had any training regarding a biological or chemical casualty. According to Senate Report 103-900, by the time of the invasion of Kuwait, Iraq had developed biological weapons. The Regal Report states that Iraq's biological warfare program was the most advanced in the Arab world. There is substantial evidence to suggest that the Iraqi military used the Soviet doctrine of multiple chemicals and multiple biologicals against our troops. This serves to confuse the diagnostic and treatment process and would account for the wide variety of symptoms displayed by Gulf War veterans.
Most of the guys that I served with are either severely disabled or dead due to the fact of their exposure to the different elements that were involved.
Michael is a veteran of Desert Storm and served in the area of special operations. Because of fear of reprisal by the Department of Defense or loss of his veterans' benefits, he has requested that we alter his voice and image.
One memory that sticks very clearly in my mind is the chemical alarms. At least once a day, we'd have a chemical alarm go off. And after a while, we learned to pay attention to them because we were told it was a malfunction. They would try and tell us that either it had blown paint on it, some fumes from something that had been painted nearby had been blown on it, and that set it off, and so on and so forth. And it makes me wonder. They claim that no chemical weapons were used, but I have every reason to believe that now, in retrospect, it's so sad. It's so sad that you trust them so much that when the chemical alarm goes off, and most normal human beings would go, well, I don't care what you say, that chemical alarm goes off, I'm going to take precautions. But you are so indoctrinated in the fact that, oh, well, we're here to look out for you, we're going to take care of you, that when the chemical alarms go off, you just sit there and continue eating or reading or whatever it was you were doing.
On a number of occasions, chemical alarms went off, and we were ordered not to basically respond to them or report them or write down statistics or even study the environment we were in, which is normally what an NBC person would do. Once an alarm goes off, you start putting, testing things around to see if there's anything happening. At the first call of an alarm, we would be told a number of different things, like it was the gasoline setting it off, or it was the oil well fires burning that was setting it off, or it could have been anything other than an actual chemical or biological agent. Surely wasn't. Don't worry about it, soldier. You'll be okay.
We had alarms going off, chemical alarms, and there were several occasions where we had to go into full mop gear in the middle of the night, or especially in the middle of the night. It's unbelievable that we had all this equipment that had been calibrated and sent over there prior to the war, and we had set out monitors in the perimeter and in the area to detect any kind of chemical activity. However, what is of significant and monumental importance is the fact that we had no biological detection capabilities over there whatsoever. And this all relates back to the fact that we destroyed their chemical biological sites and also the bunker complexes, not to mention the big one in Camisea, which is the only one that got any kind of real attention due to the fact that an individual or several individuals happened to film the contents of that bunker complex. The order was given to blow the place up rather than the normal procedures when you find a place like that magnitude holding the contents that it did. There were other means of disposal. The area was secured, and what surprises me is the fact that we received no warning. No one was instructed to get into any kind of mop gear or any type of chemical protective posture, although it's questionable whether it would have helped anyway.
Well, we were issued, MOP suit, military occupational protective posture is what MOP stands for. MOP suits, we were issued them, but they were useless to us after the first 3 days after we opened the package. So you get in country, they issue you a brand new suit, it's got a charcoal filter in it, but the minute that package has been opened and that suit has been liberated, that suit is useless. You can't keep putting it on and taking it off.
The Department of Defense has long touted that American troops are the best prepared, trained, and equipped in the world. Unfortunately, the equipment that was meant to save their lives may very well have cost them their health in Desert Shield and Storm. Information has now been obtained that proves that the chemical suits sold to the Department of Defense during 1989 were in fact useless. Isratex, a company from Raynell, West Virginia, sold nearly 800,000 defective suits that later proved to be full of tears, holes, and poor stitching. One hole can mean the life or death of a soldier during a chemical exposure. The company subsequently filed for bankruptcy, and its owners have never faced accountability for their actions. The Camisea bunker complex is estimated to be 100 bunkers and 60 warehouses, each the size of a super Walmart. The destruction of Camisea was not even discussed until June of 1996, when it was addressed by Senator Specter at the Senate Armed Forces hearing. General Schwarzkopf said the following.
As I stated, the first time I ever heard of Camisea was in 1996 when it was first announced by the Department of Defense, and nobody was more surprised than I was.
A little later in his testimony, General Schwarzkopf apparently contradicted himself when he said the following.
I remember General Franks came to me, and I assume it was Camisea he was talking about at the time, because it was about the same time frame, and talked about this huge ammunition dump that they had found with literally tons and tons and tons of ammunition in it, and there was no way they could possibly retrograde it, and I challenged him on that, and he convinced me that no, they couldn't retrograde it, and therefore they were going to destroy it in place. I said, fine. Now that's Camisea. From what I heard about the size of the bunker that Franks was talking about and the others that they blew up, these were huge bunkers with crates and crates and crates and crates of ammunition in them, and I can only assume that they either didn't recognize them or didn't see them at the time. We were under pressure to withdraw, and under the pressures of withdrawal, we did destroy everything we could so that the Iraqis couldn't fall back in on it and use it in some other war against us.
General Schwarzkopf just stated that he was concerned about the Iraqis regaining control of the ammunition that was contained at the Camisea ammunition depot. However, several individuals have come forward with other reasons as to why the bunker depots were hastily destroyed.
I'm Dan Topolsky. I was the Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Defense NCO for B Company, 37th Engineer Battalion. I was on the Camisea Bunker Complex mission.
Sergeant Topolsky was one of the nuclear, biological, and chemical non-commissioned officers in charge of identifying munitions at Camisea Bunker Complex in Iraq.
I felt betrayed. I felt like we had been sold out for dollars when I saw what I saw inside those bunkers.
Even though I had 40-some years in military service, if you were to bring in a bunch of ammunition and pile it up in front of me, and one of them was a 122-millimeter rocket with chemicals in it, I would not be able to tell you that that had chemicals in it, particularly if it was an Iraqi rocket with Arabic writing on it or something of the sort. We identify ours when we had them in a very specific way by color coding. I don't have the slightest idea what the Arabs did.
General Schwarzkopf stated that we identified our weapons by color coding. According to Sergeant Topolsky, the colored bands identified biological and chemical munitions inside the Camisea Bunker Complex. According to Sergeant Topolsky, the yellow or purple bands indicate chemical munitions. The green bands represent biological munitions. General Schwarzkopf also said he could not identify munitions, especially if they had Iraqi markings on them. You will also note these munitions were plainly marked in English and indicated these munitions were supplied by countries like Jordan, England, Russia, as well as the United States of America. According to the 1972 Geneva Convention, weapons of mass destruction are illegal. Therefore, according to Sergeant Dan Topolsky, it is very likely that these munitions were destroyed not so much to prevent Saddam Hussein from regaining control of them, but to destroy the evidence of these countries breaking international law.
The 37th Engineer Battalion, way back in the air campaign, was ordered by our battalion commander not to wear our protective overgarments unless specifically told to do so. My company pretty much ignored that order because my company commander supported me when I said that that was dead wrong, and he's going to wind up with a dead company if he listens to it. Now, a lot of the other companies in the battalion didn't do that.
On April 17, 1997, General Colin Powell testified before the same Senate panel, and as was the case of General Schwarzkopf, he was not required to take the oath to tell the truth. In regard to the chemical mop suit, General Powell said the following.
We used protective overgarments, boots, masks. I don't think you have seen a single battle scene from the Desert Storm War where our troops were not in mop gear.
Well, the Department of Defense officials continue to lie about what we know and what happened during Gulf War I. But it's real simple. The chemical agent alarms went off. There was no other reason for them to go off. The individuals got sick. There's no other reason for them to get sick. And medical tests, my own medical tests, confirm, absolutely confirm, the sarin and cyclosarin exposures, for which I had been notified directly by the Deputy Secretary of Defense by name in a personal letter that, hey Doug, you got exposed to sarin and cyclosarin because you were downwind from Comasea. But Comasea was only one of over 100 sites that we deliberately blew up after the completion of the ground war from March through the fall of 1991.
Even though the Department of Defense continues to deny the widespread use of chemicals and biologicals during the first Gulf War, Jonathan Tucker of the Monterey Institute of International Studies has demonstrated evidence for the use of chemicals in the Kuwaiti theater of operations. The U.S. intelligence reports show the presence of Iraqi chemical weapons. Military log entries describe the discovery of chemical munitions in Iraqi bunkers during and after the ground war. There are incidents in which troops reported acute, numerous symptoms of toxic chemical exposure. There's credible detections of chemical warfare agents made by Czech, French, and American forces. Chemical warfare agents that were detected by coalition forces during the Gulf War include the nerve agent tabin, sarin, cyclosarin, and the blister agents sulfur, mustard, and lewisite. To this date, there has been no diagnosis or treatment offered by the Department of Defense or Veterans Administration. Dr. Robert Haley, MD of the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School in Dallas, Texas, has detected damage in the brains of those Gulf War veterans who were near the explosion of Comasea. Those injuries had resulted in not only increased social problems, but also a 90% divorce rate and increased crime rates among those vets who showed damage in the area of the brain that controls judgment. The children of Gulf War veterans have shown increased defects such as Goldenhar syndrome, a missing eye or ear, major organ or digestive deformities, and general failure to thrive. 13 years after the Gulf War, the Department of Defense still calls the Gulf War illness a mystery disease. Either the Pentagon employs the most incompetent researchers and physicians in the world, or the cover-up is by design that these troops are being denied meaningful medical care. We can only conclude that the Department of Defense is waiting for an army to die.
The threat of biological warfare is nothing new to the military, but the Persian Gulf War placed a special emphasis on it. This renewed emphasis caused the Defense Department to look at how it was protecting men and women in uniform from this battlefield threat, this unseen enemy. Staff Sergeant Noah Berg looks at one of those enemies and what is being done to fight it.
The Defense Department says it can be a big threat on the modern battlefield. Anthrax, most commonly associated with livestock. And the type that worries those military leaders most is the type that is inhaled.
Sometimes people refer to as very early stages as something like a common cold. But then the person goes downhill very quickly.
Because of the potential anthrax threat, last year the Defense Department ordered vaccinations. And one of the first in line was Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Eric Benken. Despite isolated protests, the vast majority of medical experts endorsed the vaccine's use. And despite charges that the so-called Gulf War syndrome and anthrax are connected, Huxell says that's just not true. The Defense Department continues to stress the safety of the anthrax vaccine, and all troops headed for the Persian Gulf receive the inoculation series.
We had all the problems from immunizations. Our team was tasked with to put together the anthrax vaccine program in theater. But we were also ordered, do not record lots, batches, doses, who got them, what their reactions were, when they got them, or how many they got. Direct orders.
There's enough paperwork right now to prove there is a Gulf War illness, and there's certain medicines that control it, and that's all they're doing right now is controlling it for a few.
Staff Sergeant Mark Zeller was a member of Special Operations in the 18th Airborne Corps. He served in the Iraq-Iran War, Desert Shield, and Desert Storm campaigns.
And we're all forced to roll up our sleeves and pull down our pants and get shots in the gluteus and in the tricep muscles of our arms. We all started getting sick, but we didn't think nothing of it because our flight surgeon was telling us that it's hygiene that's getting us. We're all not taking baths every day. It's like maybe once a week or once every 3 days. And that hygiene was supposedly getting the best of us, so we didn't think anything of it after that.
They punched us with all these different vaccines, you know, supposedly to protect us, and knowing that, you know, some of these had never been tested on humans.
My neck bones are degenerating. My lower back's degenerating. No one knows why. They want to go in there and scrape it and biopsy it. I'm like, I don't want to be in a wheelchair afterwards. It's pretty damaging to a guy that used to be in special operations and jumped out of airplanes for a living. So.
The use of vaccines in the military with recruits and servicemen and women is well documented. What is not well known is the relationship between the Department of Defense and pharmaceutical companies who have a vested interest in the widespread use of vaccines, what is contained in the vaccines, and just how many of those vaccines that were given that were in fact experimental. The experimentation of individual military members by the bureaucracy of the military medical establishment crosses all party lines. Military experimental use of vaccines have been conducted during the past 50 years. The senior Bush administration ordered the use of experimental vaccines anthrax and botulinum during the buildup of the first Gulf War. The Clinton administration ordered the experimental use of the tick-borne encephalitis vaccine in Bosnia. Perhaps one of the most devastating executive orders regarding vaccines came under the Clinton administration. Executive Order 13139 essentially orders the use of experimental vaccines and/or drugs at any time without the service member's consent to be given to anyone in the military as long as the President or the Secretary of Defense approves. During the first Gulf War, it was not unusual for a service member ordered to Iraq in 1991 to receive 10 to 17 vaccines in one setting. Thousands of U.S. and coalition military personnel who served in the Persian Gulf War are now seriously incapacitated from unknown causes. One common thread for all military personnel were the vaccines. Many of those who did not deploy became ill also. Unfortunately, the U.S. military medical establishment has continued to conduct on an ongoing basis operations such as Project Badger and that has been referred to as a Manhattan-like project that involved the Tri-Service Vaccine Task Force. Credit for the best vaccine research should go to Gary Matsumoto in his acclaimed book entitled Vaccine A. Matsumoto concludes that the government covertly experimented on troops using squalene, which is an oil-based booster used to make vaccines stronger. Squalene has only been approved for use in experimental AIDS and experimental malaria vaccines. Since a large percentage of U.S. forces tested positive for squalene, It has led many individuals to believe that the anthrax vaccine could have been a primary clinical trial for an AIDS vaccine experiment. What the DoD should have disclosed to the troops is that squalene causes life-threatening diseases such as lupus, crippling arthritis, and multiple sclerosis. On May 11, 1999, at an Air Force briefing held at Dover Air Force Base, Air Force Surgeon General Charles H. Rodman II denied the use of squalene in the anthrax vaccine. He was backed up by Army Colonel Arthur Friedlander. However, 6 weeks later, the FDA identified the presence of squalene in 2 separate vaccine lots. With the reintroduction of the anthrax vaccine prior to the Second Gulf War, up to 50% of Air National Guard pilots resigned rather than take the deadly vaccine. To this date, the Department of Defense continues to give the anthrax vaccine to U.S. military.
The minute you walk into a recruiter's office, the first thing they say is, "Young man, if you do this, you'll be taken care of forever." And in modern day, the 21st century soldier, it includes women. So men and women are promised health care should they become sick from the battlefield. And the fact of the matter is that since Operation Desert Storm concluded, 10 to 11,000 soldiers are dead. 250,000 of us get a check from the Veterans Administration for undiagnosed illnesses, and double that amount have actually gone to the Veterans Administration and entered into study groups known as ionizing radiation study groups and Gulf War depleted uranium study groups. And that's just being used as a guinea pig. So we were abused by the Department of Defense. We got sent to a contaminated battlefield. We came home, we were being studied by the Veterans Administration, and every time we turn around and look for some help, somebody calls us a post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's not appropriate. We're not stressed out, we're sick. We've been contaminated. I do what I do every day because the system hurt me.
Phyllis, you're on the air with Dennis Kine. Go ahead, please.
I just want to take time, Dennis, to thank you so much and be able to say this personally to you. And I want to urge the folks to order your book. And I can't go at the pace that I used to, and I'm so thankful for someone like you to help some of us old-timers.
It hurt me as a soldier and it hurt me as a veteran, and I don't want to see anybody else get hurt. I don't do this because I need to inflict any pain on anybody. I do this because young men and women enter voluntarily into a system to go serve their country, serve their friends, serve their family, and serve their fellow Americans, and they get duped by the recruiter from the very beginning when they're told, if you get injured or become sick, we will take care of you. And for 14 years, I've been a prime example. My family members, my brothers, are prime examples of people who never got cared for.
There's legislation in Congress right now to implement another draft. Every parent needs to decide if they're willing to send their child to be part of a military medical establishment experimentation process, because that's exactly what is going to take place. For the past 50 years, we've been experimenting upon hundreds of thousands of our military. It's incomprehensible the damage that has taken place in the lives of these servicemen and women. And it's not just the servicemen and women, it's their families, their spouses, their children that have been severely affected. It must stop. How will we ever get anyone to join the military knowing that they're going to be exposed to whatever the Department of Defense desires to do with them? Once people are aware of the massive amount of experimentation that takes place in our military, we won't have one. We won't have a group of people that will serve, and for obvious reasons. Because of the Ferris Doctrine, which has blocked any kind of compensation, assistance, or really any accountability from the Department of Defense or the military, our troops are living in some kind of slippery slope. They have no rights. With Executive Order 13139, they can be experimented upon without their consent, anytime, any place. When will it stop? How will it stop? And what must we do?
One of the, I think, problems with American law is that there is
a number of ways that municipalities, states, and the federal government will often immunize themselves from what would normally be seen as tort actions. In the United States, we have something called the Ferris Doctrine, which essentially articulates a rule of sovereign immunity that says the federal government is not liable for anything that happens to you while you are in military service. The doctrine originates from the year 1950, and the court at that time heard the case of a military serviceman who was killed in a barracks fire, and ultimately decided that it was good public policy not to allow these lawsuits.
This really is the ultimate in hypocrisy. You see the heroic search and rescue missions where the government is very publicly going in and rescuing prisoners of war in combat. And the message there, or the propaganda, if you will, is that we care about you, the soldier. The reality is very different. The reality is that they are shielding themselves behind an outdated legislation and using the soldiers essentially as pawns in a chess game.
The Ferris case was literally about a serviceman who was injured in a barracks fire in New York State. That's a very different kind of case than the subsequent cases that have been brought to the Supreme Court. A case like depleted uranium or Agent Orange or something like the Tuskegee experiment, this is about the government knowingly allowing you to be injured. Some would argue intentionally allowing it to happen, certainly behaving through gross negligence to allow you to suffer injury to yourself. And the courts have consistently, for the last 5 decades, upheld this as a legal doctrine that is alive and well in this country. Now, recently, in the late 1980s, ironically, one of the most conservative justices, Justice Scalia, has indicated in a decision where he was joined by 3 other justices that the Ferris Doctrine was wrongly decided. And so there's some hope that the court is starting to see that a doctrine that began over the principle of negligence ought not be applied when you get into really criminal knowledge.
BeyondTreason.com will be a focal point, an area where people can go to find out what can be done, what needs to be done, and how to help. We must all join together to say, enough is enough. You see, if they experiment upon the military, the citizens are next. We can no longer play the role of esprit de corps in the military, of patriotism, of blind patriotism. We must accept the fact that it is our fault that we have allowed this to take place in this country. We call ourselves Americans, and this is freedom, and yet our sons and daughters are dying. Those that are responsible for these acts should spend the rest of their natural lives in prison for what they have done. There is no question, from the presidents on down for the past 50 years, those that have been in charge of these experiments, there is no question that this is truly beyond treason.
So there you have it for this time. Thanks for watching, and come back next time. For News and Blues, I'm Rob Spear. Good night.